Justice Part 2. We've just explained that we beings, we human beings, we have a consciousness, an awareness that looks out and looks in. And we aspire to harmonize thought and action. And in a way, that represents a kind of aspiration and longing to get back to a perfect original state. If we can just weave a bit of a myth for a moment, imagine that we have a deep memory of an original Edenic state. Edenic as in the Garden of Eden or the original place. And that state's been lost, but we want to get back to it. We want to return to Eden. And we see that animals don't seem to have this problem coordinating thought and action. They are spontaneous, but they're also automatic because they operate on instinct. So they don't have to deliberate like justice with the pans, the scales, to deliberate and go backwards and forwards and so on. They are equipped with nature, by nature, with an inherent instinct what to do in any situation. But they lack that self-reflection, the self-consciousness that we have. Life is a bit more complicated for us because having eaten of a particular tree, we have to choose between two evils, as they do in the upcoming presidential election, as we normally do in most political elections. We're choosing the lesser of two evils, or we choose between good and evil, or we have to make a choice between two options. We are choice makers, in other words, because of this free will that we have. And sometimes, well, to make choices wisely and not haphazardly requires us to have an integrated view of existence such that our choices are not clashing with one another. But choice making seems to take time, and it seems to take us out of life. Come on, make a decision. Well, I haven't made up my mind. I'm still deliberating because I have a choice to make. And we kind of tell ourselves that we can just take time out of life. We can just step off the merry-go-round. It'll go around and we'll catch it on the next round.
You never do.
You can't, can you?
No, it still happens, regardless.
Yes, you can't step into that same river twice, if that is from Heraclitus. You can't step into the same river twice. You can't. I think it's not exactly confirmatory of what I'm trying to express here. I'm saying that you imagine that you can step off the merry-go-round to make a decision, but life goes on and you move along with life. So you need to be aware of that. So we're aspiring to an Edenic state which is enriched by consciousness and a lot of experimentation and a lot of trial and error. And hopefully we've learned from our mistakes. Because maybe after all the trial and error, we can be human beings with a volitional consciousness, and choosing in the sense that we know why we're making the choices we're making. It's not simply instinctual. It's not simply reflex, automatic. And at the same time, we're in the flow of life. We're spontaneous, like an animal. more like a child than a full-grown human being who's tormented with so much existential angst. So action seems to be, well, it is an active word by definition. Reaction, not so much. See, there's what we do, and then there's what happens to us. So we set in motion forces, but those forces have consequences.
Yeah, they sure do.
Cause and effect, but actions and reactions, or actions and consequences. Isaac Newton tried to formulate, well, he did formulate a physical law. I'm not appraising that law one way or the other, but the law said that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Well, if that were the case, could not a similar law be operating at the moral realm, in the moral realm? So every action has an equal and opposite reaction, has a consequence. By the way, that's why there's a whole school of ethics called consequentialism. They judge whether an action is good or bad based on the consequences. And the utilitarians that began with Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, 19th century, who said that one should act in order to maximise the general welfare, the greatest good for the greatest number. And even in matters of justice, justice is what delivers the greatest good to the greatest number. They are consequentialists of sorts because they're looking at the end result, not the source, but not the head, but the tail of this animal that we're trying to work out the shape of, the consequences. So certainly there must be some sort of necessary connection between actions and consequences, between means and ends, causes and effects. It's a big chain. Now, in the broader sense, we act because we want to have an effect on the world. All human beings are engaged in some kind of experimentation on the world. And when this gets out of hand, you get occult and magical illusions of grandeur. Like you can control everything and you know everything. Only God, the Creator, knows everything and controls everything. Do you make the sun come up in the morning? Come off it. But in our own little spheres, I suppose, we like to think that we can make things happen and have some power. Not much though, but I'm not trashing all of this as inappropriate magic, because common sense says that we all do this in different ways to some extent. For example, if we make an appointment with somebody, we like to think that we have some control over whether we can get to that appointment on time or not. We like to think that we have some control over what we do in a day or how the furniture is arranged in our house.
But
can we
you're not
plan for our
talking
life?
About magic in the way that a lot of people talk about it. We like witchcraft.
No, I'm not. I think people are.
I don't think there's any power in that.
People can easily go off the deep end with the magical allure because they think they can have power outside their province and they're usurping some other.
It's connected with the ego and whatever.
Yeah, but I'm just talking about normal control over one's life And in fact, if we don't have it, if we can't seem to turn up on time or control our behaviour to an extent, and we are considered to be neurotic. We are then considered to be misfits, and maybe we are sent to be medicated, or we are classified as we could be certified or called disabled, and we need carers and people minding us and looking after us. So it's
Some
expected.
people like that, believe it or not.
Yes, that can be kinky too.
They get a lot of attention. Yeah.
Yeah, but we expect human beings to have some modicum of control over their lives and to exercise some kind of power. And the way we do it is through trial and error and experiment, and test the limits of our power.
You hit the nail on the head when you said over your life. I think that that's the only power we've got really, is over our own life, not over others.
Yeah, it becomes
no control over anybody.
It can
else.
become megalomaniacal or pathological if you
Unless
try
you
to
threaten
control other people.
Unless you threaten them.
Yeah, but we're not looking at that type of coercion or standover tactic. There is an authentic power, which is power over oneself, insofar as, I mean, do you make your heart beat? Do you make your cells metabolize? So come on, there's a limit here. Power over oneself. Did you will yourself to have that cancer? Before you start speaking like a megalomaniac, realise just how limited our power is.
Our power is very limited. Exactly. Yeah. We're at the mercy.
Right. But nevertheless, this little fart in a tin that keeps circulating around and around.
You too can be a witch.
With megalomaniac ambitions, it all that choice making, it's got to manage. And it wants to act on the world with power and effectiveness. And that is the trial and error that I'm talking about. Now that's action. Now, if every action begets a reaction or a consequence, then we can look at those consequences as a totality, as our experience. On the one hand, we've got experiment, and the other hand, we've got experience. Experiment is active and experience is passive, because we're harvesting the effects of our actions. Like that line from the scriptures that says, as you sow, so shall ye reap. We're harvesting. What goes around comes around. Now, I think that to get back to your original question about the cosmic principle of justice, which can help us understand Ma'at and karma, the Egyptian and the Indian takes on this as a cosmic balance, as an order, then justice has to do with that reckoning of experience, what comes back. And it's going to happen whether you're in a primitive setting or a civilized setting. It's going to happen whether there's a Supreme Court in your country or not. It's going to happen no matter what social institutions you have on the landscape. Maybe it'll happen if you're the sole surviving human being on the planet. Because maybe there's a reckoning that happens at the end of your mortal life.
Because you need a balance.
Mm-hmm.
You're always trying to accomplish that.
So I think this is the most abstract idea of justice. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Like people that need to be served justice are the ones that sort it out the most. It's almost like they want the justice to help them achieve their own balance, if you know what I mean.
Ah, right.
You see that happening a lot.
Right. So there's something in us that craves the justice.
Yeah. dob themselves in, or
Well, that's why Dostoevsky wrote his famous novel Crime and Punishment.
I read a little bit of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that Raskolnikov character, he thought he could conceive of the perfect crime and kill somebody who was one of these useless eaters and so on, and then finds that at the end of the day there's something in him that's screaming out to be punished or to receive justice.
Please, I need a balance.
What is it? So again, the balance comes back into it. We have unbalanced desire, and if what we seek in the world, if what we want, if what we desire, if the desire that powers our experimentation, if I can put it that way, if that's unbalanced, then it needs to be corrected. And with or without institutional facilitation, a correction will take place, and that's called justice. So I want to begin with that basic definition, because maybe that has the capacity and scope to cover most of what we want to cover. So the endeavour that we call the law, noble endeavour, you probably have friends or relatives that have become lawyers or are going through law school, and maybe they want to be lawyers.
Nephew.
Called attorneys in some places, called solicitors and barristers in other places. And then King's Counsels, used to be Queen's Counsel. Or they may want to be judges. They may want to do the balancing.
We've got to go
through the ranks and so on.
Ranks before you get to that point.
But they are involved in this great enterprise called the law. And what's the connection between the law and justice, as I've just described it?
Sometimes nothing.
Right. And some clever people think, oh, there's no necessary connection. Some people think that the ideal of justice isn't meant to be reflected in the law.
That's right.
Whether through the legislature or parliament or through the law courts, particularly the law courts, that what they do is not necessarily to embody or reflect the ideal of justice. What do you think? Do you think it is? Doesn't it make sense that it should have some necessary connection to justice?
Absolutely, but it doesn't.
And when it doesn't, why doesn't it? What does it reflect? Is it the view of Thrasymachus in the Platonic dialogues, who was
Well, it must
Socrates
be coloured a little bit by the judge and his point of view. It has to be. There's no way a judge could be completely impartial about it.
Well, he should be blindfolded.
He should be.
Metaphorically.
He's not. His point of view will be always at the forefront.
So you're saying personal biases come into it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And the personal is often melding in with the political, so political biases come into it as well. And then
That's right.
We know that corruption takes place as well. People can get bribed behind the scenes.
That's right.
I scratch your back, you scratch my back. So for one reason or another, sometimes it's not justice that prevails, but truth becomes the opinion of the powerful, and justice becomes the ruthless will of the powerful political interests in society. So when John Rawls was saying that the ultimate aim of any kind of intellectual endeavour is truth, that's the ultimate virtue that we aspire to. When our social institutions, the ultimate virtue is justice, well, that's more of a a normative statement in the sense that, well, that's the way it should be. But we need to, of course, to appreciate that often it's not like that. So instead of truth, we get the Thrasimican idea that truth is the opinion of the powerful. It's their view. They control the instruments of propaganda through the media, so they can put that view out and convince people. If they push it hard enough, you keep telling the same old lies and BS, then eventually it seeps in and people believe it and they parrot it and they think it's the truth.
That's right.
If truth has no objective standing, and the correlate of that would be justice. So either justice is true, it is real, is an ideal, and it does operate, and that our legislative and judicial institutions need to reflect and embody it. Otherwise,
But can they?
it's simply an instrument of oppression, all of these institutions. Can they embody it? Well, we know, everybody knows of cases that went wrong in the courts, people that didn't get their justice. I suppose the extreme case when innocent people have been executed
Absolutely.
for something that they haven't done.
Happened a lot.
And we often see people who are engaged in a lot of skullduggery and evil getting off virtually scot-free.
That's right.
So there's been a perversion of the process here.
That's right.
So the institutions can actually be at war with justice. Instead of facilitating justice, they can impede justice.
Oh, yeah. Hide it.
So we make that distinction
Cover it.
between,
Bury it.
yeah,
Bury it.
bury it, yeah. We make that necessary distinction between institutional delivery of justice, which is normative, and I think a civilized and a good society needs to do, and
Maybe God can do that.
the
for us.
existence of justice. Well, ultimately,
Can do that.
we rely on a divine judge as it's the ultimate fallback position. What happens when justice isn't served on earth?
It's horrible.
So we'll get into
Lots
that
of
as
pain
well.
and suffering. That's what happens.
So I might just keep this transmission tight and keep it to that point that we've seen thought and action, the need to harmonize them for our integral evolution as human beings. And then in understanding the action part, we appreciate that every action has its consequences. The action is like the head and the consequence is like the tail of one and the same thing. And the totality of consequences that flow back in our experience, which is passive as opposed to our active experimentation, the totality of that experience is really tantamount to the cosmic principle of justice, ma'at or karma. It is a balancing agent. It corrects unbalanced desire. Unbalanced desire has to be corrected. And it sets things back in balance. And that justice is operating. It is operating through all of nature, really. The planet sometimes wreaks justice on us. And if we treat planet Earth like shit,
It'll let us know about it.
it will let us know about it. It'll be one upset planet and there will be consequences.
Service.
That's part of justice too. And then there will be people, unfortunately, in the path of the consequences who may then use this as another opportunity to indulge an existential despair. Like, how can these things happen? Why doesn't some power step in and prevent them? So justice can be mediated through the natural world, and it should be mediated through the human world. Each one of us in our life should be an agent of justice, facilitating the workings out of justice or consequences. And those who do it professionally are called lawyers and judges, more so than the legislators. There is a difference between the branches of government. We don't have to go into that now. But that's basically where we're coming from in talking about justice. So that will do us for now.